Introduce our speakers today. First, we begin with Danny He, who heads the sales end of Cloud Science Web Defacement Monitor and Restorer Solutions, collectively known as the Web Orion Suite. Danny brings together more than 7 years of experience in the security industry and is a certified CISSP and CCSP professional. Next, we have Mr. Eugene Lam, who is a Deputy Chief Executive Officer at NetTrust, the first public certificate authority in Asia and the only accredited certificate authority in Singapore. Eugene oversees NetTrust's expansion of cryptographic products and solutions for businesses looking to digitally transform their workflow and secure their sensitive documents. Last but not least, we have Mr. Ferdinand Fong, who is experienced in the area of cybersecurity consulting at Wislink Group, providing a well-rounded approach for GRC, penetration testing, as well as cybersecurity solutions, with a specialized background in cloud computing. So good morning, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today.
Morning, Toby. Thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you. Yeah. So as part of our first, to kickstart off this panel discussion, I'll begin with a fairly general question based off what you have seen in terms of the SingCert advisory. And I'd like to ask the panel itself, what are your immediate takeaways? And maybe we can start first with Danny itself from CloudSign.
Oh yeah, so thank you, Toby. So very good question. Actually, the SingCert advisory is a very good reminder to everyone, right? Website security has been around for more than 10 years, but from our data sources, we still see around 500,000 websites being defaced on a yearly basis throughout the whole world. That's actually more than 1,000 per day if you think about it. I think that there are still a lot of misconceptions. There are still a lot of understanding we need to have on website security. And that's where I think today, the panel here, we hope to share some industry insights to help you make your website more secure, be it SME, enterprises, or even governments.
Thanks, Danny. And perhaps we'll go on to NetTrust side, Eugene, if you have any key takeaways to share.
Yeah, I think cybersecurity is an ever-evolving landscape and industry. So I'm really glad to see that SingCert is giving out quantitative advice on what to do instead of just providing policies on what needs to be done. I think this actionable advice will not just help people who have expertise to implement policies like the MNCs, but it also gives SME the ability to safeguard their digital assets as well as their branding.
Thanks, Eugene. And perhaps also any inputs from Ferdinand as well.
Right, thank you, Toby. So I think the advisory come at a timely manner. Right, as we know, throughout the pandemic, there's a huge growth, right, in digitalization. And as a matter of fact, I think cloud is also expected to grow by 20%, right, year on year, right, from 2021 to 2022. So I would say the advisory come at a timely, fashion, because website is typically used by organization, I would say, to basically engage their clients or customers or the public in general, right? So they provide basically information, they provide transactions as well as access. So it's very important to keep it secure.
Thanks a lot. So we hear a lot about, as mentioned by Danny as well, in terms of the number of defacements that are happening. And that, of course, brings in the level of significance that website attacks are happening, as well as the actionable advice that our SMEs need to be aware of so that they can actually safeguard their environments, as well as the growth in cloud services, which now, of course, increase the attack surface that and also really sets the kind of field that our environment is now in terms of security. So in terms of, I'd like to ask in terms of for CloudSign and Wislink itself, which are the kind of security recommendations that take priority for organizations and why, at least based off this advisory? Perhaps, Danny, if you won't mind, we could start with you itself for this.
Well, currently, I think that there is just an increase in cyber attack worldwide, right? Also with the recent Russian-Ukraine war, although you can see that the war is physical, from the threat intel and so on, we actually discovered that there's an increase of cyber attack between both countries. And cyber attack are also borderless. So when attackers try to actually attack each other, there will be collateral damage and just increasing in cyber security probes against websites throughout the world. So I think this advisory quite timely to actually remind the industry what to do.
Sure, thanks. And maybe Ferdinand, if you mind sharing your inputs as well on this. Are there any
Okay.
particular recommendations that you think organizations need to take into account?
Well, from our perspective, I would say basically my recommendation would be to, engage an experienced or recognize, certified basic organization to do, your vulnerability assessment. When it comes to addressing web security, right, I mean, how do we know what we need to put in place, right? So in order to do that, the first thing to do would be to find out the vulnerabilities before it can be leveraged, and basically try to find out what are the gaps and we prioritize it accordingly. So that would be my advice.
Sure. Thanks a lot. So I hear a lot much about gap analysis and of course the influx of cyber warfare, which of course is again a trending topic nowadays, especially with the Russia-Ukraine conflict that is continuing to persist. And of course, it's not only just restricted to nation states. We also have your common businesses or even simple IT users that are affected as well. So not everyone is a potential potentially affected by this, and so I'll move on to into this topic itself. I'd like to understand, maybe Ferdinand, if you mind sharing, what are the common security practices or perhaps tools that organizations tend to neglect, at least from your experience, and or what are the things that you often have to advise clients because these are fields maybe they have neglected or not looked into as much. If you don't mind sharing with that.
Okay, so basically from what I can normally see, other than having your cybersecurity solution in place, as I've mentioned earlier, understanding your vulnerability is key. And to do that, normally what we do is we would carry out an assessment, right? For example, web penetration testing. That would be one of those things or tools and services that we can leverage on in order to do to find out more, in terms of where the vulnerabilities are and how we can basically, as I mentioned earlier, close the gap itself. So these are the things that I would say organization typically would not do, right? They don't see the benefit in doing, let's say, a web application pen test or having solution in place, such as maybe a web application firewall. So these are basically the things that we see, yeah.
I see. Well, thanks for sharing those inputs again. Then perhaps we can move on to the context of encryption itself, which of course is a very well-known topic, but often also somewhat neglected as well, or perhaps not commonly discussed, especially amongst cybersecurity groups. Either the encryption is usually mentioned as a part of compliance measure, but we'd like to understand maybe from Netra's side, Mr. Eugene, if you wouldn't mind sharing, like how can encryption be effectively implemented to secure data either being retained or transmitted by websites itself?
I think encryption as a whole can be broken down into many parts: encryption of data at rest, as well as encryption of data in transit. We first talk about the encryption of data at rest. So I think this in practical usage will be storing of passwords or personal identifiable information in database. If we talk about encryption in transit, it will be typically SSL or traffic that is being encrypted when you browse a website. In today's world, you will very rarely find non-HTTPS servers, so non-encrypted traffic servers, because of how Google did a change in 2014. So there was a change done by Google where they will rank the SEO ranking to the bottom or lower priorities. So it is a concept that is used to encourage people to move to HTTPS servers. However, with that in place, encryption becomes a double-edged sword, because with HTTPS, traditional network-based security scanners can no longer scan the traffic, because the traffic is then being encrypted from the browser all the way to the end servers. So there is a concept known as trusted providers of certificate. This helps people identify who the organization is. Let's say I go to nettrust.net, then who actually owns the domain of nettrust.net. I'll go into details of this a little bit later. But if you are a home-based user, for example, a free public certificate will probably make sense. But however, if you are running a medium or big enterprise, then branding is likely more important. So you will likely want to go with a trusted provider that gives a little bit of additional validation, not just to your stakeholders, but to your customers as well.
I see. Thanks, Eugene. So from what you gathered just now, I understand that of course, as part of the changes that have been brought around by members such as Google and big players in the internet, we also now HTTPS, of course, being encouraged and also somewhat affects the SEO rankings itself. Am I right is that in my interpretation of that, what you shared?
Correct. So it affects the SEO ranking. That's why most users or most content providers now will have to go for HTTPS if they want to be searchable via Google. So that is one of the biggest push of using HTTPS in public-facing websites.
So as a website owner, I'm also encouraged that not only for the security matters, but also for my presence as well on a search engine, that to of course have the correct SSL cert in this case. I see. I'd like to branch this on to perhaps Whistling Group in this case. Ferdinand, if you mind sharing more on say perhaps how data encryption for websites is assessed from a penetration testing angle, and maybe you can share some insights on that. How is it involved in terms of data encryption? How is it tested?
Okay, well, that really depends on the type of encryption that we're looking at, right? So one of the type of encryption is basically SSL, right? So which is used in HTTPS. So for this, we will typically look at certificate information, right? This is something which Eugene touched upon earlier. Then we look at the kind of supported protocol that they have in there, right? Whether it's TLS version 1, 1.1, 1.2. Then we'll go further and we'll look into, and we test for the strength of the cipher that's been used. Right. So the other encryption I would say would be the data encryption itself. Whether the data is encrypted before it's sent out, or whether the encryption is and we'll check also to see whether or not the encryption is implemented correctly. Right. This is basically based on the range of algorithm used, whether they can be decrypted easily due to the decryption function that resides either on the server side, the client side, or whether it's hard coded into the JavaScript itself. So this is typically what we do, right, when we do our assessment when it comes to the encryption itself.
I see. And I just want to tap on what you shared just now in terms of how you test the encryption measures. Is there a unified standard across all the industries of all the website owners, or are there essential guidelines that essentially allow website owners to understand, okay, I have enough encryption in place, or there's a proper algorithm that is industry recognized, or is it a unified thing, or is it very much separated by the different industries that they are involved in? May I just ask if you have any thoughts on this? Yeah.
So when it comes to those encryption standards, there's actually quite a few out there. So I think it really depends on the business itself and the kind of data that you're actually protecting. So one of the things that you can leverage on is to go and look into the different frameworks that we have out there, and the framework itself would help as a guide for organization to choose the right encryption for their usage or for the value of the data that they're actually protecting.
I see.
So yeah, so there's no one silver bullet that targets everything. So typically in our tests that we do, we see a whole different kinds of encryption that's been actually used.
I see. All right. Thanks, Ferdinand. And maybe I'll branch again back to NetTrust, back to Eugene itself. So as a vendor of SSL certs and encryption itself, can I understand what is the usual trends that are for approaching website encryption? Like, do your customers, when they usually approach you, do they seek out encryption usually before or after being informed of their penetration testing results? Is it like a preparatory measure or something that comes after that? Just may I understand more of this?
I think a lot of times it depends on the purpose of the website. So if the website is internal facing, that means it's only going to, there is no need for people to be able to search up the website. So it's not a www front where someone goes up to the website and even looks for very simple things such as looking for the address of the shop, for example. I mean, if there is no need to serve members of the public, then usually the priority for using a public-facing SSL or public trusted SSL is pretty low. So that you will come after security testing or VA. So, but if it's used for the premise of hosting for public-facing websites, so if there is people that needs to do transactions on it, then the priority of it goes higher, and typically this requires a certificate that is issued by a public CA.
I see. All right. That's certainly a valuable insight here, especially when it comes to financial transactions. I imagine that is of the most sensitive nature. So I take it that the finance sector is also involved. Are there any other particular industries, Eugene, if I may ask, that also perhaps would you say if the finance sector is probably the highest demands usually the highest level of security when it comes to encryption, or are there additional industries that also match that limit, or are even requiring even further, I mean, the highest level encryption? Are you able to share a bit on that?
I think with regards to the needs wise, I think financial industry is always there's always a spotlight on the financial industry, mainly because of a couple of reasons. First is the industry itself is highly regulated, so there's a lot of demand from the authorities that certain security practice have to be put in place. And the other more pragmatic part is they also have more money, so there there is a higher chance that they are willing to pay for premium to secure branding. If we look at a mom and pop shop versus FSI or financial industry, you will automatically assume that the financial industry will be more willing to invest in premium security products, not necessarily because they want to, but because they also have to because of the regulation. So FSI, unfortunately, there's a big spotlight on it.
See, and I think just from what was mentioned earlier, if I may just bounce back to perhaps Ferdinand, in terms of pen testing that is happening, at least for websites itself, are you seeing it being requested more frequently again from the finance sector, just to mirror off what Eugene was sending, or do you also see other industries that perhaps also are of a similar standard, or is it usually across the board the frequency of penetration tests that are required for websites? Is it, would you mind sharing a bit more on that for the industry itself?
No, I would really like to echo what Eugene have just mentioned. Right? It's typically driven by regulatory requirement or by mandates. So I would definitely see, or I see mostly in the FSI industry, we see a lot of pen testing coming from there. We also see those that have that's basically handle PII a lot. So this would come from, let's say, the insurance industry or from government agencies, right? So the typical mom and pop shop is what Eugene has said. It's not really, and also because they don't handle, let's say, PII, they tend not to, engage us in pen testing as much. So usually I would say, especially in Singapore, it's driven by requirements, by mandates.
I see. And so if I will say a SME owner, just may I ask generally, how frequent are the penetration tests requested from your site, or what would you recommend? Would it be an annual affair or a quarterly affair that that you think would be sufficient in terms of at least ensuring that my environment is safe for those small to medium business owners itself? Is there a general mandate? Yeah.
There's really no real fixed rule for SMEs. My personal recommendation would be to take it like you would when you go for your general health check once a year, or whenever there's major changes in your environment. Right? So that would be my recommendation.
I see. Okay. Yeah. So it's very much aside from being regulation driven, of course, which will then, I think, it's usually out of the business's hands on how frequent they have to do it, or what extent their security measures have to be. At least this would be a general guideline that SME should follow: an annual penetration test, as well as, of course, checking on what security assets they have on hand. Maybe I'll move on to the next question, which is more on what are the security aspects that website owners should consider before hosting their websites on the cloud? I think Ferdinand, of course, mentioned this early on as part of our discussion that cloud is, of course, becoming a seeing year-on-year growth and adoption by many businesses and website owners. So, Denny, if you wouldn't mind sharing CloudSign from your view itself, what are the kind of security aspects that maybe people need to consider when they move to the cloud as opposed to traditional environments?
Thank you, Toby. So I think this is a very good question, right? Because as I started, we are seeing a lot of defacement on website. They are share-hosted, co-hosted in the cloud. So how initially such a hack happened, right, is that attacker will try to hack into the main web server. There is a hosting, say, 1,000 websites from different businesses. And just because he got into the main web server, all these 1,000 websites are all hacked and defaced. So I think that one important consideration is that if you are a business owner or website owner, right, when you think of where you want to host your website, you must definitely think carefully. You want to host it on a shared web hosting together with 999 other website owners, because they might sound cheap, right? The plan for this can come affordability like $10 or $20 a month, which sounds cheap. But of course, the risk is high because if the other website has a vulnerability, it's no fault of yours and it's even no fault of the web hosting company sometimes. But there is a web application layer vulnerability in another customer website, which is co-hosted together. So when they get hacked and the attacker gain access to the web server, right? Unfortunately, your website actually get hacked as well. So we got to be really careful about this. And I would say if your website is really important to you, and if budgets allow for you to spend more to get your own web hosting, right? The other option is that you can subscribe to some full-fledged WordPress.com website that they can manage the content management and patches for you. Just to say, we are not affiliated to them in any way, be it WordPress.com or which kind of website. But that kind of takes off the security work for you. That's one option. If it's a bigger, more important website, you can host it on your own. And you definitely have to put in your own things like firewall, put in things like vulnerability assessment, and so on and so forth. So I would say these are some of the considerations from you from a security perspective when you are looking to host your website in the cloud somewhere. Additionally, I think to secure a website today, as echoing what Ferdinand has mentioned, you definitely need some kind of firewall, especially a web application firewall. If not, your website is like being naked for the hackers out there, right? So in a form of a WAF, today is actually not expensive. You can have it like $10 or $20 a month kind of package to actually protect yourself. So in WebRun, we do have that kind of package, and also we have complemented it with a monitoring system that proactively scans or monitor a website against defacement and so on. So protection monitoring is definitely important. Restoration, right? So touch wood, in the case of something bad happens, we need some way to restore a web presence. And of course, security reviews such as vulnerability scanning, penetration testing are also critical. So last but not least, also things like SSL, web security protection, monitoring review are some of the key components to actually make sure your website is hardened to protect against cyber attackers.
Thanks, Danny. Certainly a very comprehensive assessment there. Again, I guess it very much echoes what was listed in the advisory, especially when it comes to security monitoring, as well as, of course, implementing the right tools to ensure that your organization's security stack is properly actually implemented to protect from the current threats in hand. So with that, maybe I'll move on to Mr. Eugene, if you have any inputs as well to share.
I think echoing on what Danny said, right? I mean, there's really a few parts to this. If we move back to the very basic concept of cybersecurity, which is the CIA, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. In all aspects of it, even if you have the best software protection in the world, if your hardware stack is not secure, that means your data centers are not secure, attack will happen. So, I mean, it may happen. So when you choose a vendor, it doesn't necessarily mean that the cheaper vendor is the better vendor. So you really have to make a conscious choice on where the physical servers are going to be hosted at, and the software stack as well. So there are some very popular public-facing website providers like Wix, for example. I believe their software stacks and hardware stack should be quite okay. There are also many providers. If tomorrow I want to spin up a web hosting provider to host third-party website, it requires probably like 30 minutes for me to do so. I mean, whether people sign up or not, that's another question altogether, right? But to host it, all you really just need is a IIS and probably a public IP address. Yeah, so it's very easy for anybody to host a website. It's just that the security stacks that is being used to host that, that really have to, for customers, you really have to put some thought and really read your reviews and talk to people to see where should you host your website. Yeah.
See, thanks, Eugene. I think as what you touched on in terms of the security stack as well, there is, of course, a need to review probably on a yearly or quarterly basis whether your security tools are even effective in dealing with the current threats. And as you mentioned, even when it comes to acquiring from the beginning, there's also a need for website owners or those who are owning their own system environments to conduct necessary due diligence before you just willy-nilly decide to take on a vendor and adopt software that either is commonly in place. And maybe you can move on to Ferdinand if you have anything to add for this portion itself. Maybe you can, don't mind if also, maybe you can also touch on the benefits of going onto cloud, if anything else, aside from just the drawbacks that we're referring to.
Yeah, sure, Toby, thank you. Well, I think when it comes to going to cloud, one of the biggest benefit I would say for a lot of SMEs and mom and pop shop, I think is basically the economy of scale, right? So when you have hosting at those major CSPs, they are basically like going by volume and they're actually very affordable. So when it comes to web hosting, in terms of when it comes to owners, in terms of picking the right one, I would say one of the things is to look for hosting companies that meets very specific industrial standards. So let's say if you're hosting in the cloud, you want to look at ISO 27017 or 18, whichever applies. You want to look at hosting companies that have strong isolation, having support in, let's say, identity access management, ability to support SSLs, to help you with providing you with ability to do backup and restore, and with DDoS mitigation, as well as malware detection and stuff like that. So these are the things that you can consider and to look into. And of course, to do that, it all comes down to reviewing the basic artifact of audits. Right? You want to go through the audit logs to look at what they have available out there. That's how I would go about picking one.
I see. And perhaps if I can just tap on from your expertise as well in terms of the penetration testing angle, because unlike your traditional server environments where perhaps your pen test teams are looking into physical servers at the client side, how does this change when it comes to applying it for cloud itself? Because of course, now you have infrastructure and all that being handled by a CSP, whether it's AWS, GCP, or even Azure. So how does the penetration testing angle change, or is it usually in the case of providing access to the client's accounts or databases? And would you mind just sharing with our viewers how that is different from, say, your traditional web server environment?
Okay, well, the biggest difference I would say that it's no longer hosted by you. So in order to carry out any pen test, the first thing you need to do is to get permission. Right, so you need to ensure that the CSP are aware of the fact that you're carrying out a test. You need to notify them, because otherwise, an attack or a pen test could be misconstrued as an actual attack itself, and this would cause perhaps even for your hosting to be shut down for the time being, right? Because an attack, that's what they normally do, right? They will take care of the other customers as well, and not just you. And if you are the entry point, the first thing they'll do is to shut down your website. So that's one of those one point that's slightly different. Then in terms of the web application pen testing itself, I think comes in various flavor. So if we can do it from the perspective of just a regular, public web server, you can do it with a black box method. Or you can do it via gray box, where you actually have credentials and you will actually log in. You will check in the login functions. You will see if you can escalate from, let's say, a normal user to an admin and stuff like that. It's more like a testing that's done, internally. So those are the things that we would do.
I see. And so I guess when it comes to our website owners or organizations that move to the cloud, there is a sense of shared responsibility here, because the infrastructure is very much not on their hands. After all, they are in a way leasing it from the cloud security provider. And so therefore, there's a need to, of course, inform them, because it's not such a case where you can just simply open the door to a physical server instance and allow pen testing to be involved. Okay.
That's right.
I see. Yeah. So thanks for that. And so perhaps we move to the last question. It's a very simple one, which is more in a sentence or two, if you don't mind. We've discussed a lot in terms of how websites can be secured and the different angles that we have, from encryption via SSL to also penetration testing and also defacement monitoring. I'd like to just check with the panel itself, perhaps in a sentence or two, just as a key takeaway for our audience. What are the panelists' concluding remarks on their views for securing websites for the future and for our viewers itself? Maybe you can start with Danny, if so.
Okay, so I think all of us know that now our websites it's our reputation, it's our digital front door that represents the brand presence of the business. So we do not want it to be hacked, right? So essentially, key 3 points is that to take the right measure here, the first point is to protect our website with SSL cert, wall firewalls. Point number 2 is to monitor your website, right? So when in the event, if anything happens, you are the first to know about it. And third is really to review a website with testing, penetration testing, vulnerability assessment. So if your website is important, I'd like to share with the audience, please really take steps to protect our website and prevent it from getting hacked.
Sure, thanks, Danny. And perhaps we move on to the Netra site from Mr. Eugene.
I think in recent times, a website is no longer a web page where people come and look for office address. I think that Trust as an entity, we went through digital transformation as well during the COVID pandemic period. We need people, typically what we do is we get people to come face-to-face to collect our digital ID. But because of the COVID, we no longer have the luxury of people coming face-to-face. So we have to move our entire services online. So people do virtual face-to-face services with us, and we also do stuff that's beyond virtual verification. We do live chats, we do analytics for website, we do content marketing, and we do payment. So all this requires significant thought process and investment, right? Just not to make it functional, but also to secure them as well. So I think in the long term, right, if organizations are moving their services online, they really have to put thought process on where these services are going to be located at. I give you a very simple example, right? If we put all our services in the same data center, so let's say our W is in the same data center as all our core services, right? In the event that that data center goes down, how do we then inform our customers that the services are down? There is no avenue for us to inform. So that's why potentially if you need information or informative services that you need to inform customers on service outbreak and stuff like that, that service should not be put together with your core service. That should be put somewhere else so that at least you can then inform them, hey, the service is down, when are we expecting? Then you don't create panic among your customers. I think that is one thing we sort of learned along the way as we do our digital transformation journey. And I thought that would be something that is quite cool to share with the team here.
Yes, that's certainly a valid point. Thanks for that, Eugene. I think you've very much tapped on the concept of availability, not just in the case of a website, but also in terms of segregating your communication channels to provide the very objective, after all, which is the assurance to your clients and your website viewers as well. So that's also a very good point. And of course, last but not least, perhaps there's some insight to wisdom from Mr. Ferdinand as well.
All right, thank you, Toby. So when it comes to securing your website, I see this as a multi-pronged approach, right? There's no one, solution that fixes everything. So, basically just repeating what the two gentlemen has mentioned earlier is to make sure that you have some form of continuous monitoring, like such as a web replacement monitoring in place, having a web application firewall in place, as well as utilizing SSL whenever possible. And just like your yearly health checkup, I would say, do your pen testing regularly, do a vulnerability assessment with penetration testing, get all those gaps closed as much as possible, because, you have to assume that when all else fail that you have put in front, ultimately it will still come down to your website itself.
Thanks a lot, Ferdinand, as well. I think that pretty much summarizes a lot from our viewers today and our panelists. A lot of key insights that have been shared today. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers for joining in.